Paul.
This Californian upstart broke into the world of professional boxing and galloped through the most famous fighters of our time. He doesn't recognize authority, and without a shadow of a doubt, goes into the ring against the strongest. And he also manages to earn fees from his fights that professional fighters have never dreamed of. You've probably already guessed who we're talking about, the popular YouTube blogger. Jake Paul has managed to make a real revolution in the martial arts industry over the past few years. He has easily decried the former Bellator and ONE champion Ben Askren, MMA legend Anderson Silva, and destroyed the reputation of two top UFC fighters, Tyron Woodley and Nate Diaz, in the ring. Some people adore him for his talent and unsurpassed charm, while others hate him for his arrogance and contempt for the generally accepted rules. Nevertheless, Jake Paul leaves no one indifferent, and his life and career in big boxing are genuinely admirable. The brilliant victory in his first amateur fight inspired Jake greatly. So in December 2019, he announced his transition to the professional arena. His debut pro fight took place in January 2020, and Anderson Silva, a YouTuber no less well known in media circles, entered the ring against the popular showman. The newcomers took part in the undercard of the WBO World Middleweight title fight between Demetrius Andrade and Luke Keeler. From the very first seconds of the fight, every punch from Silva revealed the debutant's excitement. Paul, on the other hand, was the epitome of calm. Although the opponent deftly dodges Jake's first few jabs and right hooks, his fussiness soon began to play against him. First, Jake landed an accurate jab that caused Silva to lose his balance and almost say hello to the canvas. And at the beginning of the second minute, the situation repeated itself. This time, Paul's powerful right hook worked. Angered by several setbacks, Silva lost control of himself and actually chased Jake across the ring. But Paul shifted in time and caught up with Silva with a powerful left hook, after which he simply hung on the ropes. The tension in the ring was growing and predicted a quick ending, and so it was. In half a minute of dynamic exchange of blows, Silva landed several hard jabs and hooks. The fight was brought to a close by a pair of left and right hooks that turned Silva's head into a pendulum. Jake was saved from a merciless beating by the referee. The TKO in the first round of his debut fight was the perfect start for Paul's professional career. Jake rode the wave of hype and surfed it with great pleasure. His next fight was supposed to take place in September 2020 on the preliminary card for the Mike Tyson vs. Roy Jones Jr. exhibition match. However, a month before the fight, Tyson postponed it to the end of November, citing the prospects of more revenue per fight. Jake Paul's opponent in the Big Mike warm-up was former basketball player Nate Robinson. For the professional player, he had more than a 10-year career in the NBA. It was his first attempt as a fighter. So his attacks sometimes resembled an attempt to take the invisible ball away from Jake. Nate would rush to his opponent, close the distance, and after a few powerful blows, enter the clinch. He seemed to be happy to continue the fight on the ground if the rules of the fight allowed it. In the first minutes of the fight, Jake missed several surprisingly heavy jabs, but he could not hit his fast and agile opponent. But at the end of the first round, he improved the situation. He pulled his opponent towards him and then shifted sharply and caught him, this time with a right hook. Robinson was on the canvas and could only get up to the score of 9. However, such a gross mistake did not teach Nate anything. In a few seconds, the situation repeated itself, and the former NBA champion was again unloaded on the canvas. Jake started the second round much more confidently. With powerful single shots, he forced Nate to rush forward again, and soon his plan worked. A counter left hook by Paul sent Robinson to his third knockdown. Nate continued the fight, but did not stay in the ring for long. Jake's next attempt to attack ended in a deep knockout. Another counter hook gave Paul his second brilliant victory. After knocking out Nate Robinson, Jake got up the courage to challenge Conor McGregor himself, but the Irishman just laughed at Jake's impudence. However, a month later, Paul Jr. got another opponent. The former Bellator and ONE welterweight champion Ben Askren agreed to fight the ambitious Californian upstart. The long-awaited fight, in which Jake faced a professional fighter for the first time, took place in April 2021. This event received a lot of publicity and provided both fighters and organizers with a considerable profit. Almost 1.5 million viewers bought the paid broadcast of the fight, but the spectacle was really worth the money because no one expected such an ending. In the first minute of the fight, it seemed that Askren was the newcomer in the ring, not Paul. He was unable to land a single accurate punch. Well, Jake shot his opponent from a distance with quick jabs. Ben's first attempt to attack ended in a clinch. The rest of them also looked like a cautious pat on the shoulder. And as soon as the round crossed its equator, Paul, who had already had a good shot at single punches, sent Askren into a knockdown with a precise right hook. Ben tried to continue the fight, but the referee decided otherwise. So Ben Askren, who had only been knocked out by MMA legend Jorge Masvidal in his entire career, was forced to admit defeat to an ordinary California blogger. But it's worth noting that he received almost the biggest payday of his career for this fight. The victory of Jake Paul over Ben Askren raised many questions. Some promoters, MMA fighters, and professional boxers were convinced that something was amiss. The former champion of the world's biggest promotions could not have lost to a YouTube star who had only had 2 fights with his non-professional opponents. Paul's reputation was shaken, and he decided to restore it in the ring. It didn't take long to find an opponent. Jake had already had a fight with former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley on the day of his fight with Askren. As a former teammate of Ben, Woodley was hurt by his defeat and did not hesitate to challenge Jake Paul. The fight between the two principal rivals took place in August 2021. Despite his vast experience in MMA, boxing was new territory for Tyron. Therefore, it was difficult to place bets on the winner. In the first round, Jake mostly shot at his opponent with single punches from a distance. Tyron did not allow himself to even do that. It was only in the second round that the audience finally got a dose of adrenaline in the form of several bright exchanges of blows. In the middle of the third round, Jake finally managed to find a gap in his opponent's defense. He shook the former champion with a powerful left hook, and then he worked on him with a spectacular combination of a jab, an uppercut, and 2 versatile hooks. In return, Tyron landed a heavy cross right into Jake's open face at the same time as the final gong. Woodley's offensive tactics began to bear fruit only in the fourth round. Coming at Paul without a single punch, he soon made him panic. Jake missed more and more punches, and at the end of the round, he almost found himself on the canvas after a heavy overhook by Tyron. Only the rope saved him from the knockdown. In the 5th and 6th rounds, a real war broke out between the rivals. Jake was openly teasing his opponent, raising the degree of tension. At the same time, he missed a lot of shots, but Tyron's impenetrable defense also weakened. Jake was hitting more and more, often with his lightning-fast jabs and swinging hooks. Working through the levels, he gradually knocked down his opponent's championship pride. Over the last few rounds, Paul managed to consolidate his advantage with several effective combinations, which he mostly finished with an amplitude hook. And finally, Jake added some pepper by playing an impromptu bullfight in the ring. Woodley failed to beat the problem child, and although the judges were not unanimous, the majority gave the victory to Jake. Jake Paul's next opponent was supposed to be Tommy Fury, the younger brother of world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury. However, the Irishman withdrew from the fight due to a broken rib, so the fight already scheduled for December 2021 turned into a rematch with Tyron Woodley. This option was desirable for both opponents. Tyron wanted to rehabilitate himself for his upset loss to the newcomer, and Jake was not satisfied with a split decision victory. The ambitious YouTuber wanted to finish the former UFC champion by knockout, just like all his previous opponents. This time, Paul and Woodley didn't waste time on reconnaissance, as they already knew what to expect from each other. However, Tyron, as usual, was very cautious and kept his opponent at a distance. Jake, on the other hand, tried to engage in close combat and seemed to want to end the fight as quickly as possible. Throughout the second round, Paul was working as the number one. He quickly entered the exchange with a combination of jabs and several hooks on the levels. However, almost every one of these attacks ended in a clinch rather than the desired knockout. At the beginning of the third round, Woodley finally let his inner beast loose, and Paul got a good beating. He got out from under the hail of the former champion's punches with a deep cut that turned his face into a bloody mask. However, Tyron also had a hard time, because just one missed hook by Jake could have cost him at least a knockdown, so he was hiding from Paul's furious attacks more and more often in the clinch. In the next two rounds, Paul continued to put pressure on his opponent. And at the beginning of the sixth round, he seemed to rely on one powerful punch. His plan worked perfectly. Jake waited for the right moment and sent Tyron into a deep knockout with a charged right hand. Needless to say, the rematch was a success. Jake continued his hunt for former UFC champions in a fight with the legendary Anderson Silva. Silva already had 4 boxing fights under his belt, 3 of which he won. Moreover, in his last fight in September 2021, the Brazilian knocked out MMA legend Tito Ortiz in just a minute and a half. The problem child and the Spider met in the ring in September 2022. As soon as the bell rang, Jake began to probe his opponent with numerous jabs. Later, he caught the wave and began to openly tease his opponent, unleashing longer and longer series. Silva, on the other hand, was unperturbed and only occasionally charged with one powerful punch. In the second round, it was really hot in the ring. Silva became more active and even began to improvise, running around Jake in the style of Muhammad Ali. But Paul didn't appreciate the joke and soon knocked the legendary Spider out with a powerful right hook. Throughout the next round, Anderson controlled the center of the ring, pinning Paul to the ropes with a powerful series of punches. However, Jake didn't let up either. At the end of the round, they staged a real fight, from which Silva came out with a bloody face. Starting with the fourth round, Paul took the initiative. The Spider was inferior to him in terms of punching speed and missed more and more often. He caught Jake's hard jabs and hooks in the face. At the same time, the former UFC champion's counterattacks didn't seem to do Paul any harm. The newcomer skillfully dodged Anderson's punches, even when he managed to press him against the ropes or block him in the corner of the ring. In the last seconds of the sixth round, the tension was this fight reached its climax. The powerful exchange of blows at close range resembled a real meat grinder. It is not known how this dramatic scene would have ended if the gong had not sounded. The final round turned into a battle for survival. Jake continued to smash Silva's face into a bloody mask. Anderson also fired powerful series from time to time. However, at the beginning of the 8th round, he finally could not resist the onslaught of the ambitious newcomer. After a series of punches and a final right hook, Silva ended up on the canvas. After that, Anderson's resistance did not subside, but none of his combinations did any significant damage to Paul. He continued to get the Spider with his heavy punches, not faltering from any of the well-honed hooks. Paul won by unanimous decision, continuing his triumphant march over the heads of MMA legends. In February 2023, Paul finally got his chance to measure his strength against Tommy Fury, an opponent who had already slipped through his fingers several times. Fighting with the younger brother of Tyson Fury has become a fixture for Paul over the past 2 years. Jake was supposed to meet Tommy for the first time in the ring at the end of 2021, but the Irishman was injured and withdrew. For the second time, in August 2022, Fury was unable to take on Paul due to a visa issue. This time, however, Fury was completely healthy, and the fight was scheduled specifically for him not in the US, but in Saudi Arabia, where he could travel freely. The descendant of Irish street fighters turned out to be a tough nut to crack. He was not affected by Jake's provocations. Tommy confidently took the first round and finally unloaded a powerful series of punches on Paul. Paul's habit of sitting up and ducking under his opponent's punches didn't help him at all. Tommy had a real dynamite in his hands, and over the next few rounds, Jake felt his heavy blows more than once or twice, although Tommy also sometimes missed hard jabs and hooks from Paul. In the third round, Paul managed to land several effective series, but it cost him a lot of effort. Fury was reluctant to give him the initiative, and every time he responded to Jake with a powerful counterattack. So when Paul was unable to withstand the Irishman's onslaught, he escaped into the clinch, which he used as a pit stop. In the second minute of the fifth round, Paul shook Fury with a right overhook, and a few seconds later, he followed it up with a counter jab. However, Tommy immediately retaliated with a double hook. In the final 2 rounds, Tommy's advantage over Jake became more and more apparent. The Irishman destroyed Paul with powerful hooks. For each of his single jabs, Paul received an explosive series in response. The seemingly invincible Fury was determined to add to his already impressive list of knockouts. However, Jake was definitely not satisfied with this option. He resolutely entered into dangerous exchanges and was ready to fight to the last. At the end of the 7th round, a charged Fury made Paul stagger, and in the first minute of the 8th round, Jake was lucky. His counter jab almost put Tommy on the canvas. However, Fury took the final round and the victory. And although the judge's decision was not unanimous, this fact did not mitigate Paul's disappointment. After all, it was his first defeat. The defeat by Fury did not stop Jake Paul. On the contrary, it only increased his thirst for victory. In April 2023, Paul's next fight was announced. This time his opponent was to be none other than the Stockton gangster and one of the most scandalous MMA fighters, Nate Diaz. The fight was scheduled for August 2023 and was supposed to go off in the boxing world like a real firework. After all, both opponents were surprisingly bright and charismatic personalities. Already in the first round, Diaz missed a powerful left hook, which confused him so much that the Stockton man caught a dozen more of Paul's punches. For a moment, it seemed that this was the end of the fight. However, Nate broke the distance in time and got out from under a hail of Jake's heavy hooks and uppercuts. The result of this round was a serious cut above Nate's right eye. In the second round, Diaz, who initially took his opponent lightly, tried to rehabilitate, and then a heavy left cross from Nate hit Jake in the head. But in a few seconds, Jake took revenge, charging with his signature right hook. The ring was getting hotter and hotter. Paul was giving it his all, and Diaz, even missing punches, kept smiling with a bloody face. The third round was completely taken by Paul. But in the fourth round, Nate seemed to get a second wind. He threw a lot of hard punches at Paul, and at some point, it seemed to want to add a few sharp elbows. In the fifth round, Jake tipped the scales in his favor again, sending Nate into a knockdown with a jewel-like left hook. However, at the end of the round, Diaz also beat him up pretty good, pinning him to the ropes. The seventh round was also scored by the UFC veteran, forcing Paul to hide from his numerous punches in the clinch. And in the 8th round, he shook the Californian up with a seemingly harmless jab that significantly threw him off his balance. At the end of the round, Jake missed several heavy hooks, but fortunately, the bell rang. It seemed that Paul was losing control of the situation, while Diaz was just catching the winning wave. However, in the final 2 rounds, Jake managed to pull himself together and adequately respond to Nate's classic attacks, which were more like sudden outbursts of anger. Despite the close fight, all of the judges gave Jake the upper hand, so he managed to patch up the hole in his boxing reputation that formed after the defeat by Fury. From the day of his first fight in 2018 to the present day, Jake Paul has never lost the interest of the public. His name is always on everyone's lips, and the reason for this is not only his success in the ring. He loves provocations and pranks and doesn't miss a single opportunity to draw attention to himself. Just remember his joke about Tyron Woodley, whom he forced to get an "I Love Jake Paul" tattoo in exchange for the opportunity to take revenge. Not to mention his habit of challenging boxing and MMA legends, including Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, and even Evander Holyfield himself. However, the veterans of the blood sport are not in a hurry to refuse Jake's offer to fight in the ring, and some of them are ready to ask the blogger for such a favor themselves. A fight with Jake is an opportunity to regain their former glory for a moment and to make a lot of money. After all, this guy knows how to create excitement around himself and capitalize on the emotions of the audience like no other. The talent to turn every event into an unforgettable show is in Jake's blood. So, no doubt, he will surprise us with his next experiments in the ring more than once. You just have to wait a little longer.